Awesome. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Live from Planet X podcast. We got the great Dr. Seth Shostak, is the Senior Astronomer at the SETI Institute with degrees in physics and astronomy from Princeton University and Caltech. He has a long history of research in radio astronomy and in search for extraterrestrial intelligence. He's written more than 500 popular articles on science and technology and hosts this weekly science radio show on Big Picture Science and has authored 4 books. Seth is a frequent guest and commentator on radio shows and televisions. Dr. Seth Shostak, welcome to the Planet X podcast, and I thank you so much for being there.
Well, thank you, Robert. Honestly, I have to warn you, thanking me before I've said anything, probably not a good idea.
So, Dr. Shostak, for people who might not be into astronomy as much, can you tell us what was the thing that made you want to get into astronomy? I imagine it happened when you were young, when you were probably a young child, but what was that spark that made you want to just start looking towards the stars?
Well, in my case, Robert, it was very prosaic. I was just at home. I was 8 years old. I was at home looking through some books of my parents because I had recently learned how to read, which kind of opened worlds for me. And they had an atlas. This was a long time ago, and this atlas had maps, and I was very into maps, I have to say, as a kid. But in the back of the book, there was a diagram of something that wasn't on Earth. It was a bunch of circles. At least that's what it looked like to me. And I asked my mom, and she said, "Oh, well, that's a chart of the planets," which was a new word for me. So I asked her about the planets, and she gave me some idea what they were, and that started my interest in astronomy. I think a lot of kids get interested in something at age 8 or 9 or something. I think that's very common.
There's just something very awe-inspiring about stars to me. It's like when I look up at them, ever since I was a little kid, I feel like so drawn to them. I feel like I'm part of them. And it's always that wonder, Yeah.
Well, that's for sure. And I had relatives in the New York area, actually. And during school vacations, my parents would put me on the train and I would go up to visit my cousins in New York City. And one place that my aunt would always send me, she'd give me the 20 cents it would cost to take the subway into New York and back out. Back then. And I would go to the Hayden Planetarium, as it was called. That planetarium is still there, of course. And, I just thought it was kind of interesting that there was more to the universe than just New York.
Right. You know what? I have some very eclectic questions. I bet, do the average people come up to you and ask like really crazy off the wall questions sometimes?
Oh, yeah, all the time, actually. And almost every day I get a phone call from somebody who's, got, if you will, an off-the-wall question. There was a reporter who got in touch today, actually, to talk about the abduction phenomenon. Polls show that something like 2% of the population feels they've been abducted by aliens. And so they wanted to know more about this. Those people who are being abducted, if you happen to be in that 2% group, my recommendation to you is next time you're being abducted, take along your phone and make a few photos. That would really help. I mean, everybody's got a phone these days. So.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've never been abducted by an alien. I would love to be abducted by an alien. As long as they bring me back in one piece, I think that'd be pretty fun. Cool if you could remember it, But I have a question for you. I'm sure you're familiar with Betty and Barney Hill, and if you've been asked this question before, please, I apologize. But when Betty was under psychoanalysis, she was like remembering things, and she drew a map of the Zeta 1 and Zeta Reticuli, and then the story goes on that later on some lady did some research and she actually found that star cluster out in space. Have you guys ever pointed your instruments directly towards that and sent the signal, or have you heard something from that, or are you familiar with that star map that she drew?
Yeah, I certainly heard about it. I've only seen it reproduced on the web or something like that. Now, I couldn't remember whether it was Zeta Reticuli or whether it was the Pleiades. I guess it was Zeta Reticuli. But I was asked that question years and years ago by a radio presenter by the name of Art Bell on
Art Bell.
Coast to Coast AM. And, he was talking to me. I was actually at the radio observatory down in Puerto Rico, the Arecibo Radio Observatory, when he was talking to me. And he said, well, what about Zeta Reticuli? Are you guys going to look at that? And
right.
I don't know that we would look at it on the basis of this testimony from Betty and Barney Hill, because their stories were not the same when they were kept apart. When they were sitting in the room together, suddenly their stories became the same. But when they were apart, they were different. So I don't know whether you should believe any of that. But the thing about Zeta Reticuli, as I recall, is that it's a very young star system, maybe a few tens of millions of years or something like that. Now, that sounds like a long time, and it certainly would be a long time if you were waiting in line to buy a movie ticket. I mean, 10 million years would be a long wait. But if you're talking about cooking up life on a planet around that star and then waiting for it to become intelligent life, waiting for intelligence to evolve, you'd need a lot more than 10 million years. So it just didn't seem very plausible to begin with. And it turns out we had looked at it. We didn't pick up any signals, but, that doesn't prove anything.
Yeah, the story goes, there's like two planets that are really close to each other, almost the way the Earth is with the moon. And on each one of those planets, there's different civilizations. And those civilizations communicated back and forth with each other. And, they became like one civilization. That's their story that goes where these little gray aliens came from, or the tall grays. And but who knows? That might just be like some kind of little clue that they're giving us to telling us where they are. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I'd be skeptical personally, because these are stories. And I got to tell you that in science, stories are, maybe interesting, always entertaining, but seldom convincing.
You know what? I know you're very interested in famous explorers. How does it feel to know that other people are looking up to you in that light right now in this day and age, 2020? And I believe you're like, I don't want to say your age, but let me tell you this: you don't seem a day over your age. Like you don't seem your age. Like you don't look your age, is what I'm saying.
Yes, well, according to my wife,
whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You're in good health.
According to my wife, I'm an 11-year-old. She says emotionally you're an 11-year-old. But that's not my chronological age. Yeah, well, anybody who looks up to me as an explorer, or really anything else, is, Robert, deluded. So that sounds like false modesty, but it's the truth. I do find the stories of exploration very interesting. I suspect if I really were on the ship with Magellan or Captain Cook or any of these guys, I'd probably want to get off there as fast as I could. It'd probably be awful. I mean, just to begin with, the food, think about it. But on the other hand, they were really, sort of like William Shatner. They were boldly going, or not necessarily boldly, maybe they were being forced to go where nobody had gone before. And there's real romance in those stories. I mean, you think of 1492 and you try and remember, well, what happened in 1492? You can bet that there were a bunch of people buying clothes or going to the market or whatever in Spain. But what you remember about 1492 is that this guy lands in the Caribbean on an island, right? Chris Columbus. Exploration is something that when societies do it, it's really worth remembering. I think it's a very interesting activity.
It's awesome. Like your body of work, like how you've dedicated to research, just like that was like God's purpose for you, or like your purpose, like the dedication through the years, since you were young, is just amazing to me. And I know that you're here to spread that knowledge around the world. And I really think that you're here, man.
I mean, listen, I think it was Clint Eastwood who said in a movie once, a man's got to know his limitations. And I once asked Frank Drake, who was really the father of modern SETI experiments, the first guy to point an antenna at the sky, hoping to pick up something from ET. He did that back in 1960. Was it? Yeah, it was 1960. And, I asked him once, I said, Frank, what's the lesson you would give to other people for, having a successful life? And he folded his hands together and he thought for about 5 seconds. Frank is a very smart guy, so it only took him 5 seconds. And then he looked at me and he said, you got to know your limitations, which in my case are very extensive.
Let me ask you something. I got a question. Do you think the Earth is hollow?
No.
My friend wanted me to ask you this. He wanted me to ask you if you think the Earth is hollow, and also, do you think the moon is hollow?
Yeah, no, I don't think either one is hollow. And in fact, you can actually do an experiment about that. To begin with, from a theoretical point of view, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? The farther down you go in the Earth, I mean, it's just like the farther down you go in an ocean, right? The pressure begins to build and build and build. If you're in a submarine and you go more than a couple of 100 feet down, your submarine begins to crack and break and crush, right? That's because of the pressure of all the water on top of you, right? I mean, well known. Well, if you were to go down deep into the Earth, the pressure gets up and up. That's why, you don't have to go very far before the rock underneath you is not rock anymore. It's been, the pressure is so high that it's very hot and it's very soft. Okay, so it turns into almost a liquid. If you went all the way to the center of the Earth, there's really a lot of pressure there. So, I don't think it could be hollow. You would just, the ceilings would cave in. But even if you don't want to believe that, you can just talk to a geologist, because these guys do experiments where they go out somewhere and they put a small charge of explosive, I don't know what it is, dynamite, whatever it is, and they put that in the ground and they set it off, bam. And then they have essentially seismometers, sort of spread around as much real estate as they can, and they measure the echo, the sound from that thing bouncing back off the rock in the Earth. And they can tell you, if there was a big hollow space in the center of the Earth, they would have seen that, but they don't see it. It just it's not there, and there's nobody living there either.
I understand. Have you heard the when the astronauts landed on the moon, they say that the moon had rang like a bell? Have you heard that before?
Well, ringing like a bell, they say that about the sun too, and it's because almost any object has what are called resonance modes, right? I mean, you know this. You're a musician. I mean, if you use your fork and you tap the edge of a glass or a bottle or anything,
definitely,
right? You don't get white noise out. You get a tone, right? And that's freshman physics. That's just because there are certain frequencies that are going to be stronger because of the shape and size of that object. So in the case of the Earth, there are going to be some frequencies, sound waves, if you will, that will resonate. And it's sort of like when you go into a room that has a resonant frequency, almost any room does, and you just sort of go up and down the scales, and you'll hit one note where the whole room fills with noise, right? That's the resonance. Same deal.
I feel that. Do you? One thing I want to ask you about the wow signal. Has anybody ever revisited the wow signal lately?
Yes. The wow signal, very famous. The wow signal was picked up, I think it was 1974. I always get this, or maybe it was 77. 70s, yeah. One or the other. I never remember which it was, but it was the 1970s, and some people were using the Ohio State Radio Observatory antenna, which was located, in the vicinity of Columbus, Ohio, where Ohio State is. And it's this big antenna, but it was sort of obsolete for astronomy work. So they were just using it every day to record any signals coming from the sky. It was kind of a SETI search. Hey, let's look for aliens. And one day, one of the astronomers working there, a guy by the name of Jerry Amon, he walks into the shack where they have the equipment. They've got a big line printer. They're spewing out paper. And he flips through the pages of the paper and he finds this big signal. And he's so impressed that he writes wow next to it. So it became known as the wow signal. Right. And it was only seen once. but it certainly looked like it might be a signal from ET. Now, it has been observed many times. Again, that is to say, people have pointed antennas in the same direction on the sky, looking over the same range of radio frequency. They've never seen it, never seen it. And, it's also the case that that particular instrument in Ohio actually was two instruments. It was two receivers on there. So, you would observe in the first receiver, they pick up the signal, but then the second receiver would look at it about a minute later, and it did not see it. So whatever it was, it went away, and it really hasn't been seen since. And so all you can say is, well, I don't know, Bob. I mean, it might be ET, and then ET went on break for 40, 50 years. Or it could just be some sort of interference that was caused in the instruments.
I always want to know, like, what would you guys' protocol be? Like, say if you were to discover life. I mean, would it be something where, like, you guys would automatically tell the public right away? Would it have to go through governmental channels first? I mean, things like that. Like, if you were to make that discovery where you knew 100% that it was real, what would happen? What would be the next step as far as letting people know?
Well, in fact, there is kind of an informal agreement. I was about to say ingredient. A formal agreement amongst people who do this sort of work that if they find a signal, there are three things that they are told to do. Of course, they can ignore these. They're not in, laws or anything like that. But the first thing is make sure and check it out. Of course you want to do that. The second thing is tell everybody. And the third thing is don't broadcast something to them until you've got international consultation. So, people who live in, I don't know, Paraguay or something don't think, oh man, those Americans again, they're trying to monopolize conversation with the aliens, right? Something like that. So that's what it says. But although that's very good, and I actually worked on the document for quite a while, I don't think it's necessarily very relevant because we've had some false alarms. And I can tell you, Robert, what happens when you pick up a signal that looks like the real thing. The media know about it right away because there's no secrecy. People are sending, they're sending tweets today, or they're just sending emails 20 years ago, whatever. And so the media know right away, and they start calling you up. So that's what really happens. You'll read about it in the newspapers. You'll hear about it on the radio, on TV, whatever. You can have all the protocols you want, but unless you're going to somehow cover it all up, which is impossible, by the way, it's just going to be a story that's out there.
It would be cool if some nice aliens come visit us and help out this planet. That would be cool. That would be good for a leap in evolution.
Well, that would be wonderful, but and some people are counting on it. But personally, I wouldn't count on it because
then it might be Predator. It might be the Predator coming.
Well, that's about equally improbable because anybody that could know that we're here, that could pick up some signals and know that Homo sapiens is traipsing around the planet. I mean, those are so much more advanced societies. The idea that they would come here and help us out is like my going into the backyard. And I'm going to go back into the backyard, tell my wife that I'm going into the backyard and I'm going to help out the pigeons. I mean, I don't do that very much. And I also don't eat them. So, I just try to ignore them.
What's your opinion on this, coming from your standpoint? Mars. Do you think it's possible with technology we could terraform Mars to be a livable planet? Do you think that could happen?
Yeah, a lot of people have done a lot of work on that, or at least a lot of people have done some work on it. And it's conceivable. It doesn't violate physics. You could do it. What do you have to do to make Mars a kinder, gentler planet, right? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to, warm it up, but more important, you got to thicken up the atmosphere, right? And eventually put some oxygen in it so you can breathe. But the whole idea of warming it up is so that the water isn't always ice on the surface. I mean, you need some liquid water. So what people have suggested is all sorts of things, but basically it comes down to throwing some old refrigerators onto the surface of Mars. right? And then those old refrigerators have chlorofluorocarbons in their cooling systems, right? A wonderful greenhouse gas, which is exactly what you want on Mars, right? So you have these greenhouse gases, and so because of the greenhouse effect, Mars warms up a few degrees, and so some of the ice melts. And
Right.
when you do that, then you put more water vapor in the atmosphere. Water vapor is a great greenhouse gas too. And so that warms up Mars a little bit more, which causes more ice to melt and so forth and so on. So that's what you do to begin with. The next thing you do is you bring along some plants, I don't know,
Right.
some
I
poison
when I
ivy.
was a little when I was a little kid, I used to think that. I used to think if there were just plants on Mars to soak up all the carbon monoxide, and then put out oxygen. I was like, then of course I was thinking like, well, how would you water the plants? How would you keep the plants watered? And I was thinking you'd just have some robots there with a bunch of water and just keep watering the plants, have like a cycle that keeps, regenerating until like over a period of time. Who knows?
Yeah,
Might take
no, no, no.
500 years.
That's certainly half of it. I mean, that's the second half. The first thing you need to do is make sure that the plants don't all freeze. But
Right.
but but but,
Yeah,
but you
have
got
them
the
in like
second half.
some kind of container.
Yeah, well, if you put something under a big, plexiglass bubble, then you can do whatever you want. But if you want to terraform the whole entire planet, yeah, first warm it up and so that there's liquid water around, then put in the plants and turn some of the atmosphere into oxygen. And people have looked at this and figured out, okay, how long would it take? And the numbers you typically hear, like 100 years, would be the length of the project, and it would be a little expensive. But it's not something we're going to do here in the near future. But if you say, could humans do this 200 years from now? Yeah, maybe they do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You think stargates are possible?
Well, I never understand how these stargates work. I mean, there's just usually a big rotating spiral that you walk into, and suddenly, boing, 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 you're you're 500 years in the future or 400 years in the past or something like that. I don't know how that works.
Time travel.
Yeah, doesn't seem very possible. I mean, time travel into the future is not so hard. We're all doing it now, but time
Right.
travel into the past has consequences that are very difficult to reconcile.
I don't think the past is possible. Nah.
Yeah,
I mean, you could like leave the planet Earth and fly away for like 15 years as far as you go, speed of light, and then come back 15 years later. So you would have aged 30 years, and everybody else would be like 300 years, 3 or 400. I don't even know the exact mathematical equations, but you get what I'm saying.
I do. That's special relativity, and it all depends on how fast you can go. Yeah, yeah, you could do it. You could if you could somehow build a rocket that could go fast enough,
That could
you could
handle
do
that
it.
type.
You could age less quickly than your friends, but they won't like you for that.
Yeah. So let me ask you about ancient astronomers. What's your opinion on like how the people who built the pyramids to make them align up with celestial bodies in the sky, and they had to have this knowledge of astronomy that is beyond what the average person just being born today would not even know. Like how do you think they got that type of knowledge? Is that
Well,
for like the aliens that you're looking for, the people you're looking for?
yeah. I remember when somebody first suggested to me the pyramids might have been built by aliens. I've been to the pyramids a couple of times, and I have this really radical theory about who built them. I think it was Egyptians. I really think Egyptians built the pyramids. And if you go there, it's pretty obvious because you can see some incomplete projects where they ran out of money and stuff like that. And after all they were doing was stacking big blocks on top of one another, right? It wasn't that they were building laptops or anything like that. They were just stacking. You go to Rome, if you've been to Rome, well, you don't go these days, but if you were to go to Rome, you look at the Colosseum, that's a heck of a lot more complex than the pyramids from an architectural point of view. And if you ask people who built the Colosseum in Rome, everybody says, "Oh well, that was the Romans." Nobody says it was aliens, right? But the pyramids, they were built by Egyptians, right? And so Egyptians, well, they obviously are not as smart as those Europeans. I mean, it's kind of a funny sort of argument here that, the Mayans in Central America couldn't have built pyramids either because they're just not as smart as those Italians were. This is nutty. I mean, it's just
Well, I mean, just
bonkers.
like how they're all around the world in
Yeah.
like a grid. A grid, it's like an energy grid. Um, I think they were used for like free electricity. That's what I think. I think they had electricity back then. That's what I think
Yeah,
it was
They,
for.
they did it without wires. I don't think they had electricity. I think that if you just take a bunch of rocks, no, forget the rocks, just go buy a bunch of blocks, right? You go to a toy store, buy just a whole bunch of wooden blocks, and try stacking them up. You will end up with
I mean,
something that looks like a pyramid.
yeah. I mean, but how much those bricks weigh? You know, they say that some people think they use like sound waves to some kind of sound wave technology to make the rocks lighter than what they were. Uh, it's
Yeah. Well,
who
there's a whole
knows?
industry. I would just say to you, look, those blocks for the pyramid, the heavier ones were like 2,000 pounds. They were, they were a couple of tons, put it that way, 2 tons, maybe 4,000 pounds. All right. That's heavy for you to lift up. But if you have, 40 guys, then each one of them only has to lift essentially 10 pounds, right? And they had 40 guys. They had many more than 40 guys. They had all sorts of people because labor was still cheap back in the days of the pharaoh. So, this was a political thing. I mean, remember that Egypt is kind of this one-dimensional country. It's just along the Nile, right? So everybody was in agriculture. It wasn't that anybody was, writing social media software or anything like that. They were all in agriculture, right? And so, you had all these people, they were all planting crops at some time of the year. And then, 6 months later, they're all harvesting crops. But for the rest of the time, they're kind of sitting around. And the pharaohs were worrying that, these guys may not like the fact that I'm living high on the hog here in Memphis. And these guys are, having to plant and harvest stuff. So in order to keep them busy, I'm going to give them a civil engineering project, build my tomb. And I want it in the shape of a really high, pointy building. And sure enough, they did.
Yeah, amazing how they line up with like the Sirius stars and stuff. I want to switch gears. This is one thing I was wondering about because I know you know this stuff. If a black hole, which light can't escape. So how come like recently I've been hearing these stories about black holes spitting out stars? Like what is that all about?
Well, black holes don't spit out stars, but they do swallow
Like
stars. I mean, that they can do.
I've heard like something was ejected from a black hole recently, and they didn't know what it was. They I guess they thought it was a star, and they got thrown out of this galaxy. Like, and it's not probably not going to come back. It was like STHS something or other, or something. They named
Well,
it something.
well, black holes, can cause, take the situation of this. Black holes have all of them have what's called an event horizon. That's
Yeah, right.
just the point of no return, right? If you get any closer to the black hole than that, you're sucked in and there's no getting out, right? I mean, Stephen Hawking talked about certain virtual particles which could get out, but you can't take a star and have it get out of a black hole. It just doesn't happen. But what a black hole can do is you have a star that sort of wanders close to a black hole and sort of zips around it because of the gravitational pull of the black hole and gets accelerated sort of like a whip. And then it's flown at high, thrown at high speed away from the black hole. You can have that, and it could be at high enough speed that it escapes a galaxy. That isn't all that fast to get out of a galaxy, actually. So, you could have that, but black holes do not regurgitate stars. They will swallow them, but once you're down the gullet of a black hole, you're a goner. Right.
I wonder if we could make some type of satellite to like go in a black hole and maybe survive it. To try to get some data out of it somehow. I wonder if that's
Well, there's the
possible.
problem. You can't get the data back out, right? Because the signal can't get back out either. Not only can the probe not get back out, but you
That's,
can't. Yeah, you can't radio back. Hey, here are some photos from what it looks like inside here. You can't do that.
it's just that's amazing. Like when you just think about like if something goes in a black hole, like where does it really go? who knows? That's like the craziest thing.
Yeah, well, nobody really knows. But all you know is that, according to
Different galaxy, go to Andromeda or a different dimension or something.
maybe you get spit out, in a white hole in some other place. But that's a little unlikely. But we still don't know what happens right in the centers of black holes. We don't know yet.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, I always wondered, can a comet slow down?
Yeah, they slow down all the time. Comets are, they're just like planets, right? Planets are in orbit around the sun. So a planet like the Earth goes around the sun every 365 days, and Mercury goes around the sun every 88 days. Halley's Comet goes around the sun every, 76 years, I think?
I've seen it in the 80s. I remember that after school one day.
Well, make sure you take care of yourself so you can see it another time. But, the planet comets, they're just ice rocks, really. But the thing about comets is most of them are not in, or at least the ones we see, are not in kind of almost circular orbits around the sun. The ones you tend to see are the ones that get close to the Earth. So they're in an orbit that's sort of egg-shaped, elliptical. And so, they swing around the sun, usually at pretty high speed, and then they go back out, maybe very far away, like Halley's Comet goes quite far away, out beyond Neptune or maybe even farther. And when it's way out there, it's really slowing down. And then it comes back toward the sun. It speeds up and it goes around and comes back down. So they slow down and speed up, but it's all very well understood.
Has there ever been like a case of one completely like stopping, like slowing, like getting out of orbit to the point where maybe it wasn't like a flying comet anymore, and now it's just an asteroid floating around?
Well, the asteroids are moving too. They're in orbit around the sun. Most of the asteroids are between, Mars and Jupiter, the so-called asteroid belt, and they're in more or less a circular orbits around the sun. I mean, it's not perfect circles, but so they're kind of in circular. But yeah, no, an asteroid just really coming to a stop, whatever that means, because you have to measure stop relative to something. But I mean, stop relative to the Earth or to the sun. The only time that happens is when they hit us. Then they come to a stop. But a stop relative to the Earth, anyhow. Yeah. They talked to the dinosaurs about that.
Hey, you brought up the asteroid belt. Do you think that is the result of the planet getting destroyed?
Well, most likely it wasn't a planet that was destroyed. It was more likely that it was a planet that couldn't form. There's all this rubble there, which we call the asteroids, right? And remember, the planets were built out of rubble. They were built sort of bottom up from small pieces that, sort of coalesced and then pulled more things in because of their gravity. So you start with a lot of small things and you build up a big thing called a planet. But trying to build a planet, I mean, there was material to build a planet between Mars and Jupiter. There's a big gap between Mars and Jupiter. It's a long way from Mars to Jupiter. There was stuff there to build a planet, but because you had Jupiter out there, which is big and, has a strong gravitational pull, Jupiter kind of, frustrated the efforts of these small things to get together and build a planet. So most likely it was the planet that never formed. It was the baby that was never born.
That's an interesting take on that. That's very interesting. Now, what about Planet X? I call my podcast Live from Planet X. Everybody's talking about Planet X, just like a 10th planet that swings out of the orbit for 3,000 years and comes back and makes the Earth wobble, and then we're set back to zero. People think that's what happens. What's your take on Planet X, Nibiru, the Anunnaki, and how they all tie into that?
Yeah, well, Robert, I don't want to force you to change the name of the podcast here, but
I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah,
I've been talking about Planet X since like '92.
Oh, yeah.
Since I first heard it, I've always just like.
Well, there's a long history of what's been called Planet X because that name has been applied to a lot of things. Back before 1930, people were talking about a Planet X beyond Pluto because Pluto was still a planet back then. Well, no, beyond Neptune. Yeah, Planet X because it was X the unknown. And then this guy Clyde Tombaugh, an Indiana astronomer, started as an amateur actually, and he found Pluto. So that was Planet 9. wasn't quite X10, but anyhow. But since then, I mean, there are people looking for a planet X these days out way beyond Pluto. But if you're talking about Nibiru, which is this thing that supposedly comes into the inner solar system every 5,000 years or whatever it is, maybe it's 3,000, I don't know, and wreaks havoc and destruction and gets close enough to the Earth to cause tsunamis and Cleveland to shake or whatever, or maybe even spell the end of Earth. I would say your chances of winning the lottery are better than the chances of that being true. And the reason is, if that were really happening every 3 or 5,000 years, it would disrupt the orbits of the the planets we know about, the 8 well-known planets. And they're not very disruptive. They're they're pretty calm in their orbital motions. So I don't think there's any observational evidence for Nibiru. And not only that, people's telling you, oh, well, Nibiru, it's about the size of the Earth or whatever they say it is. And it's, coming in and it's going to arrive here in X years and so forth. And you can just do the computation. I've done it. You should be able to see it with a telescope, right? But nobody sees it.
Yeah, there's been some pictures popping up on the internet of people saying they've captured images of it. The way Photoshop is and stuff nowadays, you never know. I mean,
I'd be skeptical.
All right. Hey. So, tell people about your podcast.
Yeah, well, our podcast, and it's also a broadcast, is Big Picture Science. And anybody can find it. You just go into your browser and type into Google or whatever your search engine preference may be and type Big Picture Science. Our show this week is actually about the coronavirus, so I'm sure it'll sicken you. I just give it a shot. It's every week.
Yeah, I like that line. That was funny. The coronavirus. You think? I'm not even gonna go there with that. I was gonna say, do you think we could get some type of viruses or diseases, bacteria coming from outer space?
Well, there is
on an asteroid or something.
Yeah. No, there are guys who've said that that's what's happening. I don't know if they've specifically said in the case of coronavirus, but they certainly said case of many other diseases that indeed we're getting, microbes from space and they're causing sickness. And this idea is not totally crazy. I mean, it's conceivable that rocks kicked off of other worlds could bring microbes to Earth that might, be the cause of all this. But I don't think anybody who works in this field believes that, except for these two guys in England who do, because to begin with, the microbes would have a hard time surviving, even in a rock, a trip from another star system, because it would take hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. And, it's not that you couldn't sit in the middle seat as a microbe for millions of years. It's just that, it's very dry in space. There's no water. So you get desiccated. There's also very hard radiation. There's a lot of radiation. And that would, sort of rip apart any DNA or whatever they have. So there's that problem. And the other real problem is that the observational evidence for this is very, very poor. So, and as far as something like that making you sick, the things that make you sick know a lot about your biology. They actually do. These coronaviruses, what do? They go into one of your cells, right? And they make more copies of themselves. They hijack your cellular machinery, your DNA, and they make more copies of themselves. That's their job in life, to make more copies of themselves. But they can only do that if they know how your cell works. It's not that they've gone to school or anything, but they've evolved on this planet with you for the last 3 or 4 billion years. So they understand biology because your biology is the same biology that's been here for all those billions of years. Whereas something coming from space doesn't know anything about DNA or how your cells work or anything. So I really doubt that it's very likely.
Do you think inside the human body, we are, in fact, every element that's in us is exactly what makes up the universe?
Yeah. Yeah, there's very little doubt about that because, I mean, that's one of the big triumphs of astronomy, actually, over the past several centuries now, has been able to show that even stars in the most distant galaxies we can see are made out of the same stuff that we have, in Central Florida. I mean, hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, that whole list of 92 elements, those are the same that you find everywhere in the universe we can see. So you don't have to take chemistry again if you move to some other part of the universe.
Do you think a planet could be alive?
Well, I don't know how you do that. I mean, there there are certain shrubs in my garden that seem to want to convert the entire planet to that particular species of shrub, but but I don't think that the planet, for the most part, is going to be that shrub.
Hey, Dr. Shostak, what do you got to say to the flat earthers out there?
Well, I recommend that they book a ride on the International Space Station, sail around, or if they can't afford that, that's only $200,000, I think. But if they can't do that, then book a cruise ship. They're probably very cheap right now. Book a cruise ship around the Earth, because you can sail all the way around the Earth and come back and tell us if you still think it's flat.
Yeah, that flat Earth thing is just out there. It's amazing. I don't know. Well, I don't know, Doc. Let's flip the script. What kind of music do you like? It's something that nothing to do with astronomy. What kind of music do you listen to? What do you like to jam out to?
Well, it's not everybody's taste, but to be honest, when I listen to music, and I do listen to music when I'm trying to write something, it's almost always classical music, and that's because when I was in school, I played in the band and the orchestra, and I played piano and stuff like that. So I like classical music. I think there are 8 people in the world who still like classical music.
Oh, I love classical music. I have a lot of classical records around here too that I sample from.
Really?
Yeah. I listen to all types of music. I got a bunch of records in here. I listen to it all. Yeah. I love John Williams. I love John Williams. He's amazing.
You mean the guy who writes the movie scores?
Yeah.
He is terrific. Yeah,
I like his style of stuff. It's funny that the record that they sent out into outer space a long time ago.
Yes,
I believe Dr. Carl Sagan was over that.
Yes, he was. That
they just assumed that aliens would be able to build a turntable or figure out what to do.
Well, that's true. You might think it's that did the aliens know about vinyl, but I think that they can do it because the record was sent, was bolted to the side of the Voyager spacecraft, right? So they had the record. All they needed was a record player.
Oh, did they put one in there?
No,
I don't remember that part.
No, they did. They couldn't afford the weight cost of putting a record player in. But what they did do, right, because then you'd have to plug it in or something, and they might have a different electrical standard. But what they did do is, if you look on that record, there's engraved a little diagram with a needle in wavy valleys. So it shows what they need to do to play the record.
Right.
It's right there. And you could say, wait, this was the 1970s. Even in the 1970s, why didn't they send a cassette or maybe not a CD, maybe they didn't have CDs, but why did they send an old-fashioned record? And the reason is, it's kind of interesting. The reason is that any magnetic media, magnetic tape or stuff like that, would degrade in space because of the radiation. It would be thermalized. It would erase the tapes. But a record doesn't get erased. It's just a mechanical thing.
Is there a way that they track that now? Do they know where it's at?
Yeah, pretty much. They know where it's at. And they occasionally turn these things on to see if they're still alive, and they mostly are. They're quite far away now. They're several times farther away than Pluto is. So wow. They're far, but they're not they're not at the distance of the stars or anything. It'll take them a million years to get to some star, but they're pretty far away. They're farther than anything else humans have built.
Yeah, that's amazing. Dr. Shostak, you got any upcoming events where you're speaking you want to let people know about? Because in my video, well, everything's gonna be edited, but I'll put your links and stuff. But you got any upcoming events you're speaking at, or?
I don't know, Robert. I mean, I thought I did, but but they're all getting canceled. So the only event that's still on right now, but that could change by the time I have dinner, um, and that is there's the Isaac Asimov Memorial event in New York City at the American Museum of Natural History on the west side of Central Park, and where the old Hayden Planetarium was, in fact. Neil deGrasse Tyson has organized this. He's the guy at the American Museum of Natural History, and he's having an event there, and also the following night, actually, in New Jersey. So that the last I heard from Dr. Tyson, which was, I guess, Sunday, so a couple of days ago, this was all still on. But given the status regarding the cancellation of all sorts of events because of the coronavirus,
Right.
I don't know if it's going to happen or not. But if it does happen, it'll be on I guess it's on the 24th of March.
Cool. Tell the Grayson Tyson, Neil. Tell Neil I said hey.
Are you a friend of his? Do you know Neil?
No. I was trying to get in contact with him through the internet, and it's like impossible to find like a real contact for him. I just wanted to send him an email, but he's cool too.
Yeah. No, he's a very. I mean, I had to say, he's really a nice guy, and the only reason he makes it difficult to get in touch with him is because otherwise he would spend all day, every day, dealing with the thousands of emails he would get. So, he's a very well-known guy. But despite that, despite the fact that he is a real fixture in the U.S., he's basically still the nicest guy. He really is a nice guy.
Awesome. Yeah. Are you thinking about doing any future acting?
I can't act.
Any acting coming up? Sure,
No,
you can.
I can't act, but I'm in a lot of TV shows. I was just taped last week, actually, down in Hollywood for some other TV show. But that happens a lot. But acting, nope, I can't act. I wish I could, but I can't.
Well, you know what? My phone has died. I don't even know what time it is. Let's see. We're coming up to about the hour mark, I believe.
We are. It's about 10 minutes too. So I really ought to get out of here and get on the way. But
Dr. Shostak, thank you so much, and I'm going to be letting people know about your work and your books and everything, and I'm going to let people know, and I thank you so much. I know it may not look like much, but I really appreciate you spending time with me, and I wish I had some more questions. I'm just thankful.
Well, listen, I want to thank you, Robert. It's been my pleasure. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I got to say that wall behind you, the way you've fitted out your studio, I wish I had your talent for design. It's really nice.
Yeah. This is my ode to Doc Brown. I have clocks everywhere. I have clocks. And let's see if I can get you shit. There's like clocks and records everywhere. But the clocks is like Back to the Future, Doc Brown. It's like my ode to Doc Brown's garage from Back to the Future.
Do you have a DeLorean?
Just on my little coffee cup over here.
Not in the driveway. Okay.
A little time gizmo.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, my little Unky stuff. Star Wars. I love Star Wars. George Lucas. Just fascinated. I'm from Jersey. I'm from New Jersey. I went to Rahway High School.
Rahway.
Yeah, I went to Rahway High School, and I didn't even know when I was living there. I didn't even know Tesla had like a laboratory around there. I didn't even know that. And Carl Sagan, and yeah, I moved down here to Florida in '92, and I've been down here ever since.
I see. Rahway. Well, I used to take the train to Rahway. I think that Merck Pharmaceuticals located in Rahway.
Yep, I used to live a block away from Merck, right next to their baseball field. Me and my friends used to hop the fence. We played baseball over there sometimes. And yeah, I live like literally a block away, right on Patterson in East Grant.
Well, I'll tell you, all I can say about Metuchen, Rahway, Linden, Elizabeth, Newark, and New York. Those were
Yeah.
the stations, the local
Yeah.
stations through New Jersey. My favorite state. Not anybody can say that New Jersey's their favorite state, but it is mine.
I love New Jersey. I had the greatest childhood growing up there, man, and you know, just awesome. I really did. Good teachers. Had great teachers there, man. Good friends I grew up with. Don't miss the snow that much at all, but yeah.
But there probably won't be any for a while, in a while, so you don't have to worry. All right, Robert, I'm going to bomb
All
out
right,
of here.
Doc. Yeah, I'll let you go ahead and get something to eat. Thank you so much again. Have a good evening. Thank you. I can't wait to edit this up.
Okay, Rob. Thanks very much.
Yo, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.